Kris Reuter. I'm Lisa Wogan, Vice President with the Economic Alliance of Kankakee County, a county-wide investment attraction organization working in the interconnected realms of business, workforce, and community development. The Alliance is hosting today's event with the Kankakee County Chamber of Commerce and the Kankakee Area Human Resource Managers Association. Kris Reuter and Spikeball were on the leading edge of the remote working trend, which has seen 159% growth over the past 12 years, according to Flex Jobs and Global Workplace Analytics. Spikeball's team has been distributed from day one, and the COVID-19 pandemic is anticipated to many to only accelerate that strong trend. Our conversation today with Kris and his team about how remote working is working for him will last about an hour. But before we begin, a couple of housekeeping notes. Of course, this session is being recorded. The recording will be publicly posted and shared with attendees following the event. Audience audio and video will be off for the duration of today's event, and we encourage your questions, which you can submit in the chat box for consideration. In 2008, Kris Reuter, a Kankakee native, founded Kankakee Spikeball Inc. The goal of the company, and this is an ambitious one, is to create the next great global sport. Spikeball has 10+ million players worldwide, tournaments all over the world, and has been featured on ESPN, The Wall Street Journal, Chicago Tribune, and Shark Tank. The company has been listed on Inc. magazine's Best Places to Work, has twice made Inc.'s list of the 500 fastest growing businesses in America, and has appeared on Forbes magazine's list of the top 25 small businesses in the USA. 2019 revenue for Spikeball was $21 million. A married father of 3, Kris lives in Chicago. He is currently serving on the board of the not-for-profit I Grow Chicago and is studying the topic of anti-racism. And a special note, just Kris has been very active in the Kankakee market, even though he's been working at a distance in Chicago. He's been working with us for several years on our entrepreneurship programming in the community, including our business plan competition Enterprise U and Kankakee's high school's incubator program. So we appreciate all of his involvement in our local market. So at this point, we're all eager to learn more about how Spikeball has grown, using an all-remote workforce, and how his company has pivoted during this challenging time of pandemic. And I'd like to turn the conversation over to my colleague, Angela Morey, Executive Director of the Kankakee County Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you, Lisa. We are so excited to have you on board, Kris, with us today. Quite a resume. I know you started out, kind of in your living room at late hours at night. Tell us a little bit about that and kind of the first steps in creating Spikeball and how you even got that idea.
Yeah, well, number one, thank you for having me. And I'd love to be able to accurately say I invented Spikeball, but I did not. I brought it back to life. So when I was growing up in Riverview, some friends that lived down the street, the Kennedys, they actually bought a Spikeball set at the local toy store. I forget exactly where. I brought it back to the neighborhood, and we all thought it was pretty cool and started playing it on and off over the years. And from what we learned, the product launched in 1989 and it was killed in 1991. So I guess it just didn't sell well or something. But we kept playing it on and off over the years. And when we'd play, people would, strangers would kind of walk up and ask about the game. And it happened enough times where, finally the light bulb went off and, we decided, let's see if we can actually bring this thing back to life. So that's essentially what we did. We formed the legal corporation in 2007 and then actually launched the company in 2008. And it was a side job. So, we agreed that I would be the one kind of doing the actual work and running the show. And, my brother, my cousin, the Kennedys, and a few others all chipped in to start the company, but they essentially became silent shareholders. And, we raised, it was a total of about $100,000, so maybe $10,000, $15,000 ahead, which was enough to get the company started, to get our first 1,000 Spikeball sets, to get the packaging, the website, and all that. But sure wasn't, after all that was paid for, there was really no money to pay any employees. So At the time, I think I was working at Microsoft, and I'd do that day job, and then I'd come home, hang out with my wife and kids. They'd go to bed, around 8 or 9 o'clock, and then that's when Spikeball work would begin. And I'd do that probably until, I don't know, 1 or 2 in the morning. Usually around midnight or so is when I would do shipping. So our first warehouse, I like to call it, that's what I'd call it back then, just so it'd sound like more of a legitimate company, but it was actually my basement. And I'd, go down to the basement at midnight. I'd grab 1 Spikeball set. If it was a really good day of sales, I'd grab 2 Spikeball sets. And then there was a late night post office not that far from my house. So I'd drive there at midnight, and believe it or not, I was the only one shipping something at Tuesday, at Tuesday at midnight or whatever it was. Handwriting the labels. I didn't even know that you could actually like print labels back then. That's how little I knew. But, basically, did that, every day, getting just a little bit smarter and kind of learning how things work, and did that for about 5 years. And then at that point, we hit $1 million in annual sales. So that was 2013. At that point, my wife and I agreed it was safe for me to quit the day job and go full time. And yeah, so that was end of 2013 when we actually started, had full-time employees. And yeah, that was kind of a very pivotal moment. One of the best days of my life, calling the boss and giving my 2 weeks. That felt pretty good.
Oh, I can't even imagine, Kris. So did you start with bringing on 1 or 2 employees, or did you kind of bring in a whole workforce right away?
No, so yeah, those 5 years, again, literally just me. And then when I did go full time, myself and Scott Palmer, who's our now COO, he and I started. I got to know him the summer before, and he was doing some project work for us, and we got to know each other. And so yeah, he actually started, I believe, the day before I did. I think I still had something else going on. I forget what, but we've been very slow to hire, and that's intentional. I don't know. I think a lot of people look at entrepreneurs and they think we're such like these big risk takers. And we're not. We are very risk averse. The risks we take are very calculated. If I would have quit my day job on day 1 and gone full time, that's very risky, but I think also very stupid, because I had no idea if this thing was going to work or not. I had a mortgage to pay. I had kids that needed food. I had, wife at home with the kids and all sorts. So I waited 5 years. I turned that flywheel 1 million times before making that jump. So Scott and I both went full time. And then, it's basically a few months after we can't keep up with the work, that's when we'll actually consider hiring somebody. But, to this day, we're going to do probably, I don't know, $30 million or something this year. And we've got 27 employees. We are a crazy efficient company. We are great at just finding different software, and, human beings are expensive. And if we can delay or avoid having to add people, we'll do that. But wanting to be very careful that the result is not everybody that does work at Spikeball is working, 50, 60 hours a week. I'm very sensitive to everybody having, their sort of their personal life. And, we don't want anybody doing more than 40 hours. If we see that is happening, we'll tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, we need to fix something. And it's usually not the employee's problem. It's just something wrong with our systems. We need to help them find some efficient ways to where they actually can get back to normal hours. So,
did you see this company being fully remote when you went full time, or is that just something that kind of happened?
Just kind of naturally happened. Like, if I think of, during those first 5 years, I used to sneak away from my day job a lot to meet people that I was doing Spikeball with. So I'd, take a long lunch, and I'd meet our manufacturer at a Starbucks, and he'd literally show up with a prototype Spikeball set, and we'd assemble it right there in the Starbucks, and everybody's looking at us like, what are you doing with that weird trampoline? Like, we're bouncing the ball and we're just acting like it's the most normal thing in the world. But that's what a quote meeting was for me. I had no conference room. I had no office. I had to be kind of discreet because I didn't want my boss to catch me. So that's just kind of how we always did it. And when I first started talking to Scott about coming on board, my initial plan was I needed a customer service rep because I was getting buried with the customer service tickets and I just couldn't keep up.
Mhm.
And my plan was going to be to hire an entry level, somebody maybe fresh out of college or something like that. And he or she would basically just work from a Starbucks or just a coffee shop. And I would sneak away from the day job and meet them maybe once or twice a day and just manage them while I kept the day job. That never happened, but that was just kind of, all right, the immediate need is customer service tickets. I'm not quite ready to make the jump yet. I'm not going to pay. I don't have enough money to pay for an office for this person. Why not just do the Starbucks thing? So that was kind of a part of our just natural DNA. I never sort of woke up one day and said, yes, I want to have a remote work company, remote workforce. It's just sort of naturally gone that way.
So because you've been in this remote mindset for so long, what would you say pre-COVID were some of your best practices working and managing in that element?
It's kind of hard for me to answer that question because it's just been the way we've always done things. But I see it as a huge advantage. If we look at kind of the way we're structured, and I look at sort of traditional, office or people coming in at 9, leaving at 5. We can hire from people all over the world. I don't need somebody that's just within driving distance of our office in Chicago. So that just opens up the candidate pool to just, literally billions of people. One thing I think has also helped is in order to make it work, you need to have trust in the employees. I've heard from a lot of friends that either work at or run what I consider sort of traditional workforces. And they're like, well, Kris, if you can't see them, how do you know they're doing their work?
Sure.
And I respond, well, how do you know they're doing their work when you do see them? I don't know. So yeah, I mean, sometimes, I know when I worked at Microsoft, and it was a normal office and I had cubicles and just kind of the whole thing. And sometimes the boss would walk by and yes, I was on Facebook. Sometimes the boss would walk by and I'm talking to a friend on the phone or whatever. But I was a salesperson and he could see my numbers and he knew that I was a really good salesperson and I was doing well. So should he really care if I'm talking to my friends or if I'm on Facebook? As long as my numbers are there, you know what? You should be happy. And he was. And oddly enough, my former boss at Microsoft now works at Spikeball. So it's worked out well. But I do think having that element of trust, one of our values at Spikeball is trust until you shouldn't. And a lot of our employees at Spikeball, this is their first job out of college. And their first day on the job is them sitting in their apartment by themselves on their couch with a laptop. And they're now going to be on a bunch of phone calls, meeting all those different Spikeball employees and all that, but they're not going into an office. And nobody is telling them, hey, that computer better be on by 9 a.m. or else. We don't really care, where or when the work gets done. Some work, of course, has deadlines and all that, but we do, I think, a good enough job interviewing where we find those people that have that intrinsic drive to where we're not going to have to be always peeking over their shoulder. And, a lot of what I do, the way I kind of run things at Spikeball and want to build the culture is what I learned that I just didn't like at my former jobs. And I had a couple bosses where they were just kind of always tapping you on the shoulder. Did you do this? Did you do that? What are you doing now? And just kind of that micromanaging thing. And I think that's why I never really liked the jobs. So we try to hire people that like the culture, that, kind of like the mission of the company. When they hear that we want to build the next great global sport, a lot of people laugh at us for thinking that big, and I get it. We're still a tiny company and we're not quite the NBA yet, but give us time. But by thinking that crazy, hopefully that will attract some people that are like, I'd love to be a part of that. Yeah.
So it sounds like you onboard fully remotely anyway, or have always done that. Do you have any kind of tips or do you just kind of go with your gut feeling on if you think somebody's right for the job or not?
A lot of it is gut. And we normally, pre-COVID, we do, not always, but if the person was remote, we'd fly them to Chicago and they'd come probably for a week and we would meet face to face. But when you come to our office in Chicago, it literally only has 6 seats in it. And usually only 2 of those seats are filled. I'm usually in an office every day and there's maybe one other person. Even though we have, I don't know, I think 8 or 9 employees in the Chicago area, and we have a beautiful office. It's tiny, but it's beautiful. Most everybody prefers to work from home, and that's fine. But normally we will fly you in for a week. They'll go down to Kankakee for a day. So our warehouses are with KCTC. They've been a fantastic partner, and everybody loves kind of seeing, where the boxes come in and, how all that works. So it's also a requirement that they go to Yanaki's when it's open if they're coming down at the right time of year. But we are, I think, business is actually booming right now. People are stuck at home and looking for something fun to do and be active, and Spikeball is becoming the answer for a lot of people. So we're doing a lot of hiring right now. I think we have 3 or 4 offer letters out right now with people I've never met face to face. It's all been Zoom interviews. Yeah, I think most of our hires actually, it has been, offer. The first time I meet the person is when they're actually during the onboarding part.
Do you do like big team annual events?
Yep. A lot of, so it's a great question. So a lot of people will say, oh, how do you actually build a culture if everybody's at home and you guys really never see each other? We have retreats twice a year. And those are usually in super fun places. So, we did Sonoma one time. We rented a big house in the Gulf Coast of Mexico. We've done Florida. We did Breckenridge. And it's basically a Monday to Friday trip where 90% of the time is supposed to be fun and 10% is supposed to be work. Everybody gets their own bed, but you are probably sharing a bedroom and bathrooms with coworkers. So, what a great way to get to know your coworkers and sharing a bathroom with them. And it's getting harder and harder to find. There's only so many houses in the U.S. that have literally 30 beds in them, but we've found them. And those are great because a lot of some people show up and you know what a Rube Goldberg machine is. Basically, people build these at Spikeball. There's a group of 6 or 7 employees that as soon as the retreat begins, they all get together and they're kind of the Rube Goldberg team. And they'll get a bunch of books and they'll line them up like they're dominoes. They'll get a Spikeball ball and maybe roll it down the stairs. It knocks down the dominoed books and then that hits another ball and it basically travels throughout the entire house. And they'll spend 3 days building these things. It's insane. But watching them all work together, it takes project management, it takes creativity, it takes working with others. Of course, there's some egos involved in there, and I think we should do this. No, I think we should do this. But they're figuring it all out on their own, and they're building relationships. And I, as the CEO, have nothing to do with it. I'm just sitting in the background, kind of watching it and saying, at most companies, I believe, and I've experienced this at my past jobs, it's the CEO trying to force that. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's, the trust fall, right? That's the best example of, just when everybody rolls their eyes about sort of the culture building stuff. But it's happening naturally and our employees genuinely just want to hang out with each other. And one other thing that I think keeps our culture strong is our values. And, almost all companies will go through the exercise of writing them. And I believe more often than not, it's maybe the CEO and COO or a few of the senior execs. They'll write the values themselves. Maybe they'll email them out to the employees and say, hey, everybody, here's our values. Let's live by them. And then you never hear about them again. Well, all of our employees' fingerprints are all over our values. So every other retreat or once a year, we literally put the values up on a TV screen and we go one by one and just kind of ask the question, do we still believe in this? Should we add something? Should we delete it? Sometimes it's just adding or deleting a comma or changing the punctuation. But by the end of that, we now have values that literally everybody can say they helped create. And it's not just something that the boss sort of shoved in their face and said, here's what we believe. This is something that we all believe. I heard the line years ago, I don't know who said it, but they said you should, hire, fire, and manage according to your values. And I love that line. And, so rather than just telling an employee, hey, good job on whatever it was, I can say, hey, Nora, good job exemplifying our value of surprise and delight. I love that. That means so much more than just good job. So not only writing the values, but actually living them. And even though there's thousands of miles between some of us, I think that and the retreats helps keep our culture strong. And, in the history of the company, we've literally had 2 people quit.
Okay.
We got voted one of the best places to work in the country. So I think we're doing something right.
Well, that leads to my next question. A lot of our attendees that are on today, are kind of trying to juggle, something that maybe they haven't before, either working remotely themselves or having their team work remotely. How do you motivate, maybe they can't do an annual retreat or semi-annual retreat. How do you motivate them, virtually and keep that going and strengthen that bond and relationship virtually, especially if you're used to seeing each other and working physically together, and now you're not?
I think I'm a rather low-key sort of a person. I'm not one of those big, loud personalities, rally the troops and rah, 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 let's go. I wouldn't consider myself really a motivator. But I think, there's a lot of benefits outside of work that the remote workers will receive. Perfect example, Ken. He's my former boss at Microsoft and works at Microsoft now, or works at Spikeball now. And the first few months he was on board, he's working at home, lives in the suburbs of Chicago. But he'd email me and say, hey, my daughter has a track meet at 3:00 this afternoon. Is it okay if I go? I want to cut out a little bit early. I'll do my work a little bit later. I'm like, absolutely. And by the way, you don't need to ask me, just go. And he asked me a couple more times because he was still in that mindset of sort of traditional office. And if you want to leave before 5, you got to make sure it's okay with the boss. He eventually got it. And, every Monday we have our team call. So literally all 27 of us dial in and we go in a circle and everybody gets to share their highs and lows. And those can be work related or personal related. And when I hear his highs of telling a story from the daughter's track meet, or from just something about being at home, the fact that he's able to spend that much more time with his family makes him value that job. And I believe motivates him that much more at the job because he knows that we value that as well. And I, of course, I don't want to get in the way of him going to his daughter's track meet, right? But if he had a quote normal job, he'd have to drive. Now he's got to commute. He has to drive home from Chicago to his home. It's probably 20, 30 minutes, hoping he's not going to get into traffic. And he's probably going to sprint to the track meet and maybe catch the tail end of the race. But that's the traditional way of doing things. This new way. So now, he and all of our employees, they get to do that sort of thing. We've had numerous employees where their spouse got a new job in a new city. And our employee didn't miss a beat. Normally they would have had to quit their job and follow the spouse, but they didn't have to. We had an employee that was based in Chicago, and I was just talking with him a little while ago, and he told me how he had just gone to Nashville the prior weekend, and he was apartment hunting. And I'm like, why in the world are you apartment hunting in Nashville? And he's like, oh, I forgot to tell you, I'm moving. And I'm like, oh, great, have fun. Other companies, you might get fired for that sort of thing, right? But I know the employee well enough, and there's been enough instances like that where I think a lot of the employees realize that this is a pretty great culture, and it's a huge advantage for us. We have an employee, she's lived in the US for, I don't know, the last 10, 15 years, but she's from Morocco. She went to Morocco home to see mom and dad as part of a bigger trip right before COVID got started. And she's stuck. She's still there.
Oh my goodness.
She has not missed a beat though. She's a fantastic employee and doing great. And she's got all this, probably more time with mom and dad than she'd like. But, you know, what other kind of company can you say, yeah, I'm not going to be home for months and I'm not sure when I can. But what a pain in the butt that would have been for us if we would have had to lose a great employee. And then we would have had to start recruiting and train somebody from brand new. And it just gives an insane amount of flexibility, not only for the company, but also for the employee. So getting back to your question of how to motivate, I think just the general environment and freedom, and you know, the word, we use the word autonomy a ton at Spikeball. And you're given a very long leash, if there really is a leash at all. Again, whether it's your first job out of college or, you know, maybe you didn't even go to college, but we just trust you. And, you know, if let's say you're on the customer service team and we see that customer service tickets are backing up and like, you know, it's taken forever to reply, then, okay, we can see that. But it's never been an issue. We don't have a ton of crazy metrics that allow us to really tightly track everybody. I sleep well at night just knowing that we've hired the right people. And again, if you don't have the trust, it's going to be really, really hard.
It sounds like that's where, you know, doing kind of your due diligence in the onboarding process to make sure you're bringing somebody strong and solid onto your team, you know, kind of pays it forward, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. And just finding the people that, you know, and it's funny, like, you know, the woman in Morocco, Aman's her name. Even before she went home, she'd tell her parents about just some of the quirky things that we do about these retreats, or, you know, every December, the employees are basically given $1,000 that they can donate to their favorite nonprofit, and just a lot of weird stuff that we do. And her parents are like, this is not a real job. We're not even sure you're like telling us the truth about all this sort of stuff. But that spreads word. And most of our employees' friends, I think, are a bit jealous that our employees' commute is literally zero. If they want to go work from a park with their laptop, they can. I'm assuming most people on this call, almost all their employees probably live in the greater Kankakee area. If you were the one company that had the remote workforce and everybody else had that traditional, and maybe even remote is still, you're hiring folks from Kankakee County or the area, but they actually get to work from home, I'd imagine that would just be a huge advantage for you. And, you know, I wouldn't say rip the Band-Aid off and go remote for everybody all on one day, but maybe just start with Fridays or Mondays. Everybody hates Mondays. So maybe you start with a Monday. I don't know what, but I'd encourage people to take that baby step, because it has been a great advantage for us.
So how has COVID affected Spikeball? Are you seeing an increase in sales because everybody's home?
Yeah. You know, when
Really?
it first hit, we were scared to death. We didn't know what was going to happen. We applied for and did get the PPP money. Once we realized business was actually going up, I didn't feel right about keeping the money, so we actually returned it. But yeah, we're having a hard time having our factory keep up. You know, we sell our product at Target, at Dick's Sporting Goods. We're doing trials with Costco and Walmart right now, and they're all calling us saying, we need more. These things are selling like crazy. So yeah, it's been interesting. So, you know, the product itself is selling really well, but normally we have tournaments all over the country, all over the world. And those, you know, that's where hundreds of people are literally getting together and playing in very close proximity. So we've had to cancel almost all of those. So that's been a bit of a bummer. But yeah, it was also kind of funny when all the newscasts a month or two ago were doing articles about how people were not social distancing or not doing, you know, and they'd always show, like, you know, the scene of people in Florida on like a beach. Almost every time they were playing Spikeball. So part of me was like, oh, you guys should be home. But the other part was like, oh, any press is good press, right? But yeah, kind of funny. The business has been great. Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about the Bradley Distribution Center. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So it came about years ago. This is probably, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago. I was talking to my uncle at Thanksgiving dinner and telling them how we're quickly outgrowing my ability to pull sets from my basement and go at midnight to ship. So I needed to somehow find somebody that could do shipping for us. And all the quotes I was getting from fulfillment places in the immediate Chicago area were very expensive. And he had told me that KCTC does that sort of thing. So called them up, and I think when we started, we took over a tiny corner of one of their warehouses. And now we've got an entire warehouse. It's over by Bishop McNamara. And they've been fantastic. We have some employees that are on our payroll, and they're our full-time employees.
Okay.
And as we need more people, they've got that flexible staff where, Christmas is huge for us. So we'll work with them and say, hey, we need some more people. And they've got a great team there. And we've been able to teach them a lot as well about different technologies that we're using in the warehouse. It's been a fantastic partnership. They've been great.
Great. I think we have some questions in the chat box. Lisa, were you going to monitor that? No.
Yes, I'm here. We have one from Brad Benoit. Kris, what are some of your defining interview questions for whether or not a candidate will make a great remote employee?
Good question. I look for intrinsic drive. And I don't usually show up to an interview with like a list of questions and just kind of go up and down. My interviews are typically more conversational. The other day I was interviewing a woman. She applied for an entry-level accounting role or finance role. We actually sent the offer letter, so fingers crossed she accepts it. And I was just like, yeah, what do you like to do in your downtime, like outside of work? And she is teaching herself how to trade options. I think maybe she's 23. She's got a subscription to the Wall Street Journal, and her sort of fun time is self-teaching trading options. And the answer was not, oh, I just like to sit and watch movies all night long or just scroll through social media. She's wanting to improve herself. She has that natural curiosity. So even when left alone to her own devices, she is looking to get better in some way. And that right there is, when she started telling me that, I was like, you know what? I've never traded options. I've been thinking about it literally for 10 years. Would you give me a 3-minute tutorial? And she just rattled it all off. But yeah, that's kind of it. And if people also don't ask about our culture and about the remote work, then that's kind of a red flag as well. If, it is a weird, it's kind of a unique setup we've got. And I make it crystal clear. I'm like, look, if you're looking for a job where on day one, you're going to be handed a playbook and told what to do, and just be told to go execute, Spikeball's not the place for you. That was my job at Microsoft. Like I literally was handed a 3-ring binder on my first day. But at Spikeball, if writing the playbook yourself, if that's attractive to you and actually being able to make decisions and have ownership of something, if I can tell that sort of thing excites them, and as we get onto that topic, if they start digging into that, that's a very good sign, because that tells me that, all right, they're interested in this and they're not just, quote, looking for a job. We have kind of a cool brand and we get a lot of notes from people that just want a job, and we don't want people that want a job. We want people that are intrigued by our weird way of doing work and that want to literally help us build something.
Well, on that note, if I could, Angela, ask a follow-up. I follow your social media quite a bit, Kris, and it sounds like you guys really are great corporate citizens. How important is that in terms of engagement as far as your workforce and talent? I would imagine you attract that becomes a source of, an attraction to a certain type of individual who may be interested in working for a company that really sets itself apart in that way.
Yeah, I mean, there's been no we've had no real formal plan around it. You know, I just feel a bit of a responsibility, you know, being a CEO of a company of a fairly well-known brand. You know, we've got, I don't know, almost 500,000 followers on Instagram, 150,000 email addresses. Like, we've got a fairly sizable megaphone here. And I feel a responsibility to use it, not only just to, you know, of course, trying to sell our product, but also to try and do some good. So if I see somebody being wronged, or if I see a way that we can help, you know, I'm going to speak up. And we've been doing it a long time. You know, a lot of it's been around, you know, environmental issues. I'm on, you know, as you mentioned earlier, I'm on the board of this nonprofit, iGrow. So we're trying to help folks in the Inglewood neighborhood of Chicago. We've, you know, especially in light of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, we've been giving a lot of money and time to organizations that are supporting things around racism and anti-racism. And we do take quite a beating on social media from people, you know, just shut up and sell your product, that sort of thing. And it doesn't bother me for the most part. It's usually, you know, teenagers that, you know, I don't think twice before sort of posting. But yeah, you know, if they're not going to buy our product because of that, then I'm okay with that. But yeah, I do feel a responsibility, you know, and the power and sort of privilege that comes with the role of CEO to actually use some of it for good.
And you find that kind of coalesces your talent pool? I mean, that kind of it becomes like a charge for them a little bit too. And is it an opportunity to kind of see what their interests are, and perhaps the company kind of gets behind that? And
absolutely. Yeah. I think it makes our employees proud to work there, or proud to work here. And some of the donations are, you know, decisions that I'll make on my own. Others will be ones that they make. You know, I mentioned earlier that, you know, every December employees get $1,000 to donate wherever they want. We're supposed to be having tournaments right now, and our tournaments are almost always on Saturdays, and they're in different cities all over the country. We're not having those tournaments, but what we changed it to, we're still promoting, you know, the event that was supposed to happen in, I don't know, let's say last weekend was, I don't know, Richmond, Virginia. We're doing fundraising. So Spikeball will match up to $5,000 donations, and that's going to go to some nonprofit in the Richmond area that is going to more likely than not be around race relations and racism. And, you know, we did a Minnesota one, and I think we raised, I think about $4,000 or something like that. And that's kind of an odd thing for a company to do. Yes, right, when everything was going on, everybody's posting Black Lives Matters and writing the check, and it just kind of dies down. But we're going to be doing this for a few more months. And, you know, book clubs have formed at Spikeball on the topic, and that's another great culture builder. Not something that I, as the CEO, had to do. Bridget, one of our employees, raised her hand and said, I think this is a topic we all should learn about. So I'm going to start a book club, and she did. One other thing we did when all the restaurants had to shut down for COVID, you know, our employees live all over the country. So I forget how much money we gave them, but we said, Spikeball is going to pay for dinner for you and whoever you live with. But it has to be a local restaurant, no big chains or anything. So some of our employees lived alone, so it was just them. Others live at home with mom and dad and their 5 siblings. And we got to see photos of everybody having dinner together. And okay, now mom and dad even love the company because we're doing stuff like that. And, you know, we want everybody cheering from all different directions. And, you know, when the employee gets to give that donation to whatever the organization is, the employee just has that sense of ownership and pride that, wow, I actually get to do this. I get to make a decision of where this is going. And it just feels really nice.
Kris, we have a question from Maggie and Jim Cookie. They want to know, how do you get appointments with the big box stores to get your product on their shelves, especially now if you can't meet in person? I imagine it's a tough task anyway. How do you do that now?
You're probably not going to like our answer, but we actually never had to ask for the appointment. They all called us.
Hey, that's a good position then.
So, you know, It was a side job of mine from 2008 to 2013. And during that time, we were pretty much all spikeball.com. And that was, I believe, building our foundation, getting, it was great doing that because we were selling direct to the consumer. So I actually got to ask those customers directly, what do you like about Spikeball? How'd you hear about it? And, I knew where they lived because I'm shipping them a product. And so I had 5 years of learning directly from the customer. And, I actually did call, if you guys remember Sports Authority, that used to be a huge chain.
Mm-hmm.
I called them. I actually got a meeting, flew to Denver, and the terms that they were going to offer us were terrible. The price, everything was bad, but I still wanted to do it because it was Sports Authority, right? Thankfully, they shot us down. A year and a half later, they went out of business, and we would have lost a ton if we were there. But about a year, not even a year after I quit my day job and went full time, Dick's Sporting Goods sent us a note, and they're like, "Hey, we've been seeing what you guys have been doing. We think it's a cool product. We'd love to carry it." So we started talking to them and eventually got on board. And then a bunch of mom and pop independent sporting goods and toy stores started calling. Target called, Walmart called. Like it's been nuts. And I think the reason they're calling is we've been focused on building our community. We've been focused on the product, and that we've put enough noise in the marketplace to where, that Dick's Sporting Goods employee was probably just out walking their dog one day in the park and looked over and saw this weird game called Spikeball. And maybe they saw it a couple days in a row, or maybe they were at a graduation party and their niece or nephew told them about it. But it happened organically. It was not us sort of knocking on the door saying, "Please let us in."
So we have another question from Maggie and Jim Cookie. And this is kind of a fun one. Do you run any internal contests for your remote employees to promote engagement and performance?
We don't do any contests that have like the employees competing against each other. We don't really have, like, a lot of companies will have, very tight metrics on how well each employee is performing, and, red, yellow, green kind of thing. And we'll have red, yellow, green against goals that are sort of department wide, but we don't have a formal way of grading each employee. And some CEOs and leaders love having a metric for absolutely everything, and it may work for them. For me, I think a couple of years ago, like maybe 5-6 years ago, we actually did try that, and it just felt like so much work. I think we did it one year, and then we were starting the next year, and we're just like, wait, this was painful. Like it's kind of like that annual review process, right? Like I remember doing it at my day jobs in past, and even the manager hated it. They did it because they had to, not because they wanted to. Neither side really got value out of it. It's literally just checking the box. And getting back to the point of relying on the gut, like I know for the most part how well each employee is doing, and I'll talk to their manager, and if the manager can't give me a solid answer, then okay, I know there's probably a problem with the manager. But no real competitions amongst people.
Okay. Another one from Brad Benoit. Have you ever had any employees struggle with working remotely, and how were you able to help them? Any kind of tips on that?
Yeah, we've had a few struggle, and a few are no longer with the company. So some have said, one person of the two people that resigned, one resigned, I think, because of the remote work, and just she wanted the playbook. She wanted to be told what to do and, go for it. And it's like, I don't even know what you should do. We hired you because you're the expert in, I think it was in wholesale sales. I've never done it, but you've done it a bunch of times. So I need you to help write the playbook. And that just didn't quite jive. So I probably should have dug deeper in the interview process there. But I don't know. I think that may be the only example of somebody not liking remote. We have had a few people, for a while we did have, I'd say it's a group of maybe 6 or 7 of us coming into the Chicago office on a regular basis. This was back when we were like maybe 10 to 12 employees. So the remote folks kind of felt like they were out of the loop. I think they almost thought like there was a party every day at the office and they were just never getting to go. So, you know, a company I look up to and do kind of copy a lot of what they do is a Chicago company called Basecamp. They've literally written books on remote work. So if you have not read their books, they're very fast reads. One is literally just called Remote. I forget the name. They've got 2 or 3 books, but they are huge proponents of remote work. And what they have said is, you know, if you're going to do it, what you don't want to do is have like 95% of your employees in the office and then 5% be remote, because those people that are remote are going to feel like, you know, the odd man out. So we do have majority of our employees are in Chicago, but even though they're in Chicago, they are remote. So I see them just as often as, you know, our employees that live in New York, California, Tennessee, or Texas.
So on the Basecamp question, I think we had this question in our that we prepared. Technology, and a lot of companies do have like a proprietary system, maybe where they do project management. We use Asana here,
Yep.
But Basecamp's another example. Have you kind of, I don't know if you want to reveal what you use, but have you had to like play around with that over the years? And I know they continually get better and better all the time with their products, but I think probably a few on the line might be interested in how you do, you know, manage that piece of it.
Yeah, we did use Asana for a while years ago. It didn't quite click for us, but obviously they're a huge company, so a lot of people love them. Basecamp has pretty much replaced internal emails for us, and that was a big change. So I think the way that most companies, even if you're in a traditional office, the way that you really communicate is just sending an email to a coworker. And emails can get buried, they can get lost, you can forget to reply, and it's a pretty, I believe, inefficient way of doing things. So Basecamp is, a lot of people say it's project management software, which it is, but it's also just our general communication tool. So anytime I want to send a note to an employee, I can just send them a quick ping, or basically like a text message via Basecamp. But, you know, the old way of doing things, so I may send a note to Sean, who, you know, owns our content. And I may, hey, Sean, would you mind making a video around this? And I'd email it to him. And maybe he'd forget. Maybe he wouldn't see the email or whatever. But now I can create a quote to do in Basecamp where it says, you know, I select the date, the time when it's due. I detail out exactly what the project is. I can include any videos of my own or photos within that and create that for Sean. When I create that, he now gets a ping on his side that says, Kris just created a to-do for you. And it's just way more efficient. So that's one that I use. For email, we do use Gmail. We're probably going to be switching, I'd imagine. Basecamp just created an entirely new email platform they call hey.com. So I'd imagine we'll probably switch to that eventually, but I only email with people that are outside of the company. On our operations team, they use a system called Monday. I think it's monday.com. And I believe we've got this giant TV in the warehouse at KCTC that just has a list of all the to-dos that need to happen in the warehouse. And there's people all over the country that are creating to-dos for the team in the warehouse to do. We don't need somebody local there saying what, you know, we can create a to-do that says the truck is showing up tomorrow at 10 a.m. Basically have staff ready to unload it because it needs to be repacked in this way. And by the way, Dick's Sporting Goods requires us to pack the pallets in a certain way. And that all shows up. And when the folks that are literally in the warehouse start clicking those to-dos as done, our COO that's in Naperville or operations person that's in Nashville, they know that the work's getting done, and they probably won't step foot in the warehouse for a month or two. So Monday.com, I believe, has been a big one. I'm not all that close to it. We are in the process of implementing NetSuite, which is a big company-wide kind of ERP system. That's a big, long implementation process. I think we'll be launching in a few months, but that'll replace, we use QuickBooks right now. That'll be replacing QuickBooks. And I'm trying to think what other software, you know, we're, from a marketing perspective, you know, we're on every social media account you could imagine. But yeah, I think that, I'm sure there's more. If our COO were on here, he'd be able to list 9 more, but.
And before we kind of throw it over to you for final thoughts, because we're up against our time, just a note from Mary Posing over at KCC. If your potential accountant turns Spikeball down, she's got a candidate for you.
My email address is kris@spikeball.com. So please send them on over. We're always looking for people. So.
Well, yeah, so it just obviously everyone appreciates your time today, taking time away from you're up in Michigan right now, so you could be out in the sun, probably on a lake somewhere. So we appreciate you being inside on your computer. Just final thoughts on remote work and maybe where you see just it going, couple sentences over the next few years. We don't see this trend going away, right? And then
Yeah.
and then Angela can kind of wrap up for us.
Yeah, so I'd say, a lot of times when I'm either on calls like this or talking to friends, a lot of the questions are around what could go wrong. And it's just sort of trying to calm those fears, if you will. I'd say let's try and flip it and say, how can this become an unfair advantage for you? It's really hard to find good employees, really hard. If you now have something that your competitor doesn't, and something that is it's not going to cost you money, it's most likely going to save you money. You no longer have to pay for a desk for this person to sit in. And studies actually show when people work from home, they work longer hours than they do when they're actually in the office. That's something we're actually having to deal with right now. I had to force all of our employees to take 3 days off in the month of May because we got the feeling that everybody was just working way too much. So rather than looking at it as something, it's kind of like, oh, this trend is coming, it's making me uncomfortable, I'm not sure how we're going to deal with it. Look at your competitors, and they most likely all have the traditional office setup. And if you start doing it and they don't, people are going to be, just wanting to, work at your company way more than the others. And even if it's not about hiring, it's about existing employees. It's a great way, I believe, to get your employees much more engaged. If they're not having to do that commute, even if it's just a commute, across from one side of town or to the other, it's a 10-minute commute. Wearing pajamas all day. Some of our employees do that. I still like to get dressed and put on a shirt with a collar, but maybe I'm old school. But just giving that freedom to the employees, that works a lot, and it doesn't cost you a nickel.
We greatly appreciate your time, Kris. If anything, you're a true testament that you can run a very successful company fully remotely and have people that want to go to work every day. And I think that's the ultimate goal for everybody, is to find that balance, between work and home life. And, ideally, those are both very strong. So we appreciate all of your insight and information in regards to that.
Thank you. I appreciate the time. And yeah, again, I'm Kris@spikeball.com. If anybody else has any other questions or anything. And yeah, remote is the way of the future. So give it a big hug. Don't push it away.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And Kris, again, we thank you for being part of this.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
Great.